Good guy, that Mike Garafolo. Yes, it's time for our weekly chat with Mike Garafolo from the NFL Network, and it's time for Tuesdays with Woody. Why is it time for Tuesdays with Woody? Well, Woody Johnson, the owner of the New York Jets, just keeps giving us great content on Tuesdays. And Tuesday, it was the firing of GM Joe Douglas. Listen, Mike, Woody has to be careful. He's got to pace himself. We only have 6 Tuesdays left in the regular season at this point.
Well, he's only got so many Tuesdays left before he potentially heads overseas once again to become the ambassador to the United Kingdom. It is Tuesdays with Woody by Jay Onrait with Mike Garafolo, forward by Mitch Albom. But I will say this about the Joe Douglas firing. They wanted to start doing their work on who's going to be the next GM. Again, because Woody Johnson wants to be part of the GM search, the coaching search before he's gone. And now these hirings have taken until late January with the inauguration day scheduled for before that. These hirings take longer. So they've got to start getting the work done here on this one. And they didn't want to do it with Joe Douglas still in the office and basically be doing it behind his back. So they said, time to move on. Joe Douglas, by the way, was the only general manager in the league who was in the final year of his contract. Jay, they had discussions before the season, and Douglas said, you know what, I think I'm going to let it roll. I think I'm going to go into my contract year here. So I think he wanted to see how this year was going to play out. I'm sure he's upset with the fact that he's not a general manager anymore, but it didn't sound like this was the greatest year for him. I think it's more in a sense of relief for him. And I say that because there are a lot of teams. He's worked a long time with the Eagles and with the Ravens. Both of those organizations have an extremely high opinion of Joe Douglas as a personnel guy. And I know that there are others around the league who do. And I remember conversations with Joe over the last couple of years where I think he was taken by surprise at how little the GM's job is to evaluate personnel and tape. There's so much more that goes into the job. So that took some adjusting to get used to. If he goes back to being a personnel guy who is back to helping teams find the best possible players, Joe Douglas is going to be very happy, and whichever team employs him next is going to be very happy. So this was just time for this one to be done with, and the Jets decided, of course, on a Tuesday to make it happen, Jay.
Appreciate that from Woody so we could keep that segment going as long as we possibly can. It also feels like the sky might be falling in Dallas. Perhaps it's just the roof at AT&T Stadium. I'm not exactly sure. I'm just happy no one was hurt, Mike, but the Dallas Cowboys fans have been hurt pretty badly with the way this team has played this season. 3-7 now after the loss to Houston on Monday. This season, the way it's gone, Mike, it has got to lead to changes. Does it not next season?
I mean, I would think so at this point. I happen to think Mike McCarthy's a really good head coach and should probably get a third chance. I mean, maybe not immediately, but he's a really good head coach. That's a tough job to be the head coach of the Cowboys. And when it goes, we saw it with a couple of coaches, including Jason Garrett. When it goes, it goes. And it's just so hard to kind of keep things back, especially when you lose your quarterback, obviously. Now, Jerry Jones was asked about the locker room, said he doesn't feel like McCarthy has lost that locker room. I think that there's a truth to that to a certain degree. I do think they played hard on Monday night, but that Houston team is much more talented, was locked and loaded. DeMeco Ryans had them ready to go after a disappointing loss the week before. So it was just a tough spot for the Cowboys. And I think there's going to be a lot of tough spots coming up. Now, Cooper Rush is still going to be the quarterback. They know what they have in Trey Lance, having seen him in practice, and obviously feel like he's not the guy. He's not ready. I think at some point before the end of the season, if this continues the way that they're losing, we're going to see him for an extended period. But I know that Jerry Jones, when he talks about not losing that locker room, he's got a Thanksgiving game here. I think he's trying to keep things as positive as possible, at least through that Thanksgiving spot there that they're going to be playing on that game. It's usually we say, oh, we got to get through the Lions game to get to the better games on Thanksgiving. We now have to enjoy the Lions game and then to get through the Cowboys game here. How the turntables have turned, as Michael Scott might say.
You know, I have to say, you're right. I never thought I'd live long enough for us to look forward to that Lions Thanksgiving game. But here we are, Mike. And you mentioned Mike McCarthy. You know, the seat's getting a bit hotter for him. Seat's getting a little hotter for a few head coaches around the NFL. Who do we have our eye on in terms of potential coaching vacancies going into next season?
we've got a cluster of them, and we've already seen a couple go down with Robert Saleh and Dennis Allen. Doug Peterson is obviously the next one. We thought by now, actually this week, that something might happen. I'm not convinced, by the way, that something won't happen by the end of the week. They're on the bye, so there's really no great rush, and Shad Khan has a couple of things he needs to take care of before he has a conversation. So Doug Peterson could be next in the near future, if not certainly by the end of the season into the offseason. Kevin Stefanski now fielding questions with this Browns team that, you know, the quarterback situation has been a mess for a couple of years with the mistake that they made in signing Deshaun Watson and giving him what they gave him. Stefanski has done as well as he possibly could. This year, just such a great disappointment. They're still talented. I still think this team could win some games down the stretch, but their schedule is incredibly tough. Wouldn't be surprised if Stefanski sticks around, but I think he's got to show some life here with this team coming down the stretch. Matt Eberflus with the Bears. Boy, this feels like it's just a matter of time. Bears don't tend to be the team that fires coaches in season, so this could be one that carries out into the offseason, and we see on what we like to term Black Monday in the business could potentially happen. Brian Daboll, look, John Mara, I've been around him enough that when he comes out in the middle of a season and says he doesn't expect to make changes, I really believe that he doesn't expect to make changes, and it's going to take this team falling off a cliff. Now, with Tommy DeVito, and we foretold this last week when we talked about Daniel Jones and the Giants likely moving on from him, we'll see if Tommy DeVito can get this a spark and get this team going a little bit. I think Daboll and Joe Shane, the general manager, are safe, but let's see how this goes down the stretch. And Antonio Pierce, I know there's talk about him. Now, the Tom Brady factor is a real one. I know he's a minority owner, but he's going to have some input there. He's going to have a lot of input, actually, I should say. So let's see if he can convince Mark Davis to make a move quickly. If he does, Antonio Pierce never had a shot with this roster. Matter of fact, prior to the season, teams were calling about Devontae Adams and a couple of other players, and the general manager of this team, Tom Telesco, said, I've got to give Antonio Pierce some kind of a chance here. Well, Devontae Adams is gone, so that tells you, I know Jacoby Myers was another one that they were calling about, but that tells you how little he's had to work with this season. I would think he would get at least a little more runway with a legitimate quarterback. He wanted Jaden Daniels before the season, could never get up there to the number 2 overall pick, and we see why with what Daniels is doing with Washington.
Finally, Mike, we spotted this picture when you were covering the Eagles' win over the Commanders this past Thursday. You took this picture, Devontae Smith celebrating his 26th birthday. Did you get a piece of the cake, Mike, and was it chocolate?
I did. No, it wasn't cut, and nobody was cutting it. I mean, they had the cake. It was sitting there, and nobody was cutting it. Now, I will say this. As I left the locker room, I walked down the hall. I saw your friend, Big Dom DeSandro. Yeah. And Dom said, hey, I got cannolis and what? Now, listen, bear with me on this one. Sviadels in the back. Now, it's sfogliatella is the Italian phrase. It's a lobster tail with cream inside. Yep. But the South Philly pronunciation, and my mother is guilty of this, and my wife, my Cuban wife, loves to laugh at it. Sviadel is what they say. So he was inviting me for pastries in the back. You want some cannolis? You want some sviadel? I said, what? All this dessert, nobody's eating it here? So hopefully at some point somebody started to dig in there.
Is there anything Big Dom can't do? Like, the guy is like the most connected person in the city of Philadelphia. It's really wild.
Oh. I can't imagine he pays for a drink or a meal. And look, you know, Dom's having his meals, right? We know that.
Yes, he is. He's definitely having his meals. Mike, I'll say this. You are the icing on our Tuesday cake every single week, and we thank you for that.